Imagine walking home after a long day, only to find that you spot your one tiny slice of order in a chaotic world has been stolen again. And the thief? A smug visitor who thinks rules don't apply to him. But the night he left an insult taped to my parking stand. That was the night I stopped being patient. And the revenge I planned. Let's just say he's still feeling it today. If you've ever been pushed around, ignored, or disrespected by someone who thought they could get away with it, hit that like button right now. Subscribe too, because today's story isn't just revenge. It's justice served cold with a lock as thick as my finger. I never thought something as small as a bicycle parking space could change the way I viewed people. But then again, disrespect doesn't care about size. Sometimes it comes disguised in the tiniest daily irritations, like having your numbered bicycle spot stolen by someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them. And when you live in Japan, where order and respect keep life running smoothly, that kind of small disrespect feels like a punch to the chest. My story started on a quiet Tuesday night. The kind of night where nothing special is supposed to happen. I had just gotten off work, exhausted, my shoulders sagging under the weight of my heavy office bag. The walk home from the station was a drag, but at least I always had one thing to look forward to: arriving at my building, heading straight to spot 105, and rolling my bike into its rightful place. It was one of the tiny wins I allowed myself in life. Predictable, clean, mine. But that night, as I turned the corner into the bicycle lot, something stopped me cold. A bright, shiny red bicycle sleek, expensive, polished like it had been waxed that morning, was parked in my space. My space, 105. I stared at the number as if somehow the paint had changed. The rage that bubbled inside me didn't explode right away, it simmered. You know that feeling? When your brain tries to be logical, whispering that maybe it was an accident, maybe it won't happen again. But your gut already knows better. I sighed, pulled my bike out of the way, and reluctantly walked to the station to park it. Another $1 gone. Not about the money, but the principle. And now I had to walk all the way home again. My legs felt heavy, and with every step, irritation curled tighter around my ribs. The next morning was worse. I had to wake up earlier, walk all the way back to the station with my heavy bag bouncing against my hip. And by the time I got to the train, my back was sweating from stress and annoyance. A bad morning does something to you. It poisons the rest of the day. I kept thinking about that red bike, about the kind of person who would do something like that. And more importantly, why my space? By the time I got home later that day, I had convinced myself it wouldn't happen again. Surely not. People in Japan are respectful. Maybe the owner was new. Maybe they made a mistake. And for a few days, life went back to normal. Until it didn't. A couple of weeks later, I came home tired again, and there it was. That same red bicycle, sitting with an arrogance that bikes shouldn't even be capable of. Same expensive frame. Same spotless tires. Same shiny seat that just screamed, "Look at me. I belong to someone who thinks they're better than you." This time, the frustration punched through the logic. I took pictures. I recorded the date. I went straight to the building, manager like a character, in a polite drama version of myself. And I explained everything in Japanese, clear, calm, respectful. His reaction? A half-hearted nod, a vague, "we'll see," and that awkward customer service smile that means, "I am absolutely not going to do anything about this." Fantastic. The third time was the breaking point. I had barely stepped into the parking area before I froze. There it was again. The red bicycle, smug and comfortable in its throne, my throne. 105. I stood there, jaw clenched so hard it felt like my teeth might crack. There's a type of anger that sits behind your eyes, throbbing like a vein about to burst. I felt it then. But even then, I tried to be reasonable. I grabbed a small piece of paper from my backpack, scribbled a polite note in Japanese. "Please don't leave your bicycle here. This is my designated space. I use it every day." I taped the note gently to the bike and walked away, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd take the hint. But hope is dangerous, because the next day I found something that made my vision blur for a second. The note I had written was gone. Not thrown away, not removed politely, no. It had been taped to my parking stand using my own tape as if to mock me. And at the bottom were a few choice Japanese insults, words that jabbed straight into your dignity. Words that didn't just disrespect you, they belittled you. Someone had taken the time to insult me on paper, tape it back in place, and leave it there like a trophy. I felt a surge of anger that tasted almost metallic. Hot, sharp, rising fast. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The audacity, the disrespect, the smugness. Every emotion I had been bottling up burst through at once. That was the moment everything changed. I wasn't angry about the space anymore. I was angry about the message, about being mocked, about being treated as if I didn't matter. Some stranger had decided that their convenience was more important than my daily life. They had gone out of their way to disrespect me. And for what? Just because they thought they could get away with it. That's when I started paying attention. I noticed something small but important. The bike was always the same red bicycle. Same model, same scratches on the pedal, same small decorative charm hanging near the handlebar. And it only appeared when a certain tenant in my building had guests. So the culprit wasn't even someone who lived there. Just a guest, a visitor, someone who felt so entitled that they couldn't be bothered to park legally for $1. Someone who felt they could take whatever they wanted. Well, he took something of mine. So I decided I'd take something of his. But revenge isn't something you rush. Not if you want it to be delicious. Revenge requires planning, slow, careful planning. Like boiling water, you let it heat until the steam becomes pressure. And that's exactly what was happening inside me. By this point, I had already been thinking about buying a new bike. Something faster, something worthy of weekend cycling trips, with a better suspension, stronger wheels, and of course, a heavy lock. A lock good enough to protect it if I ever decided to take it into rougher areas. The next time I saw the red bicycle in my spot, I didn't get angry. No, I smiled. A slow, dangerous, relieved smile. Because now, I finally had a plan. Everything changed the moment I decided to stop being the victim in my own story. Up until then, I had been reacting, walking to the station annoyed, waking up early frustrated, complaining to the manager politely, leaving notes hoping for basic decency. But the truth is, some people don't understand decency. Some people only understand consequences. And the red bicycle thief, this disrespectful, entitled visitor, was one of those people. I could feel it in the way he taped my own note back to my parking stand. I could sense it in the sloppy way he scribbled insults, as if he was so comfortable in his arrogance that he didn't even fear being caught. He thought I was harmless, the quiet foreigner in the building, the guy who probably wouldn't make trouble, the person he assumed had no power. But assumptions are dangerous, especially when they're wrong. After that last incident, I started watching, observing patterns, learning routines, paying attention to the smallest details like I was preparing for an exam. I noticed the red bicycle always appeared in the bay, evenings usually, between 7 and 9 p.m. Sometimes it stayed overnight. Sometimes it left by morning. But every time, without fail, it sat proudly in spot 105 like it owned the place. And every morning after, I found myself imagining scenarios not violent, not harmful, but poetic. Poetic justice. The kind where the lesson sticks. The kind that balances the universe just a little. The next Saturday, I went out to look for a new bicycle. I told myself I was shopping for something better for weekend trips, but deep down, I knew exactly why I was really there. I wanted a lock that was strong enough to test on someone who clearly needed a lesson. The bicycle shop was small, tucked between a convenience store and a ramen restaurant, but it had everything: a wall full of locks, heavy chains, thick cables. I remember the shopkeeper smiling politely when I picked up one of the thickest chains on the rack. "You planning to ride in a dangerous area?" he asked in Japanese. I smiled back. "Something like that." He laughed, not knowing the truth. The lock I bought was heavy, so heavy that when I held it in my hand, it felt like a small metal monster. Thick as a finger, reinforced steel, the kind of lock someone would use to secure a motorcycle. Perfect, as I walked home with it clunking against my leg with every step. I felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, my chest wasn't tight. My jaw wasn't clenched. I didn't feel powerless. It's strange how control feels quiet, steady, almost warm. It doesn't roar. It settles in your bones, making you feel solid again. When I got home, the red bicycle wasn't there. Part of me hoped it would appear soon. Part of me wanted to wait patiently. So I did. The next day, around 8:30 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of bicycle tires rolling across pavement outside. Not loud, just enough to make the hairs on my arm rise. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I simply grabbed the lock, walked downstairs like it was any other night, and stepped into the parking area. And there it was, the red bicycle, shiny, expensive, sitting in my spot like it had won something. I stood still for a long moment, watching the shadows dance across its polished surface under the small parking lot lights. I imagined the owner walking away confidently, maybe laughing with their friend. Maybe laughing, thinking they'd gotten away with it again. Thinking I was too weak or too polite to do anything. The thought made me smile, not the angry kind, but the slow, deliberate kind that forms when justice finally decides to stretch its legs. I approached the bike calmly, took the lock from my backpack, and looped it tightly around the frame and the metal stand. I pulled it hard, testing its strength. It didn't budge. I clicked the lock shut. The metallic snap echoed softly through the empty space. That sound, I'll never forget it. It was the sound of power shifting sides. I didn't leave a note. Not yet. I didn't want to give them anything to hold on to. No clues, no explanations. Just a mystery wrapped in steel. The next morning, when I went downstairs, I pretended to be surprised. I walked past the red bike like it was none of my business. But someone had definitely discovered it already, because taped to the metal stand was a new note, angry handwriting, rushed strokes, dark ink pressed so hard that the paper nearly tore. The Japanese was messy, unfiltered, full of insults and demands. Unlock this now. This is illegal. I'll go to the bay. Police. And a few colorful swear words for decoration. I felt a small thrill run through me, not pride, not arrogance, but satisfaction. The kind you get when someone who disrespected you finally feels the consequences of their own actions. I didn't touch the note. I didn't respond. I let it hang there, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. And the days rolled on. Every time I left the building, I pretended not to notice. Every time I came home, I pretended the bike wasn't locked at all. But the red bicycle stayed frozen in place. Day after day, night after night, and with every sunrise, the notes became more desperate. By the third day, the note had changed tone, still angry, but with a hint of fear. Someone is tampering with my belongings. This is wrong. If this is a joke, stop it. By the fifth day, the anger had faded. The new note was calmer, almost pitiful. Please unlock the bike. I need it. I won't use your spot. Again, please understand. The handwriting was softer now. Not pressed into the paper with rage, but rather written with regret or maybe panic. And then came the seventh day. I walked downstairs and found a long, crumpled piece of paper taped to the stand. Different handwriting this time, smoother, more polite. And at the end, a sentence that almost made me laugh out loud. I apologize. I'm sorry for using your spot. Please, I beg you, unlock the bicycle. I tried to break the lock, but it wouldn't open. Oh, I knew it wouldn't open. That lock could survive an apocalypse. Reading that note, I felt something loosen inside me, something heavy. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. Not violent, not cruel, just proportionate. He disrespected me repeatedly. He insulted me. He mocked me. And now he finally understood he couldn't walk all over whoever he wanted. I didn't unlock it. Not yet. Satisfaction is like tea. You don't gulp it down. You sip it slowly, savoring the warmth. But life has its complications. A few friends online suggested that someone so arrogant might try to involve authorities. And while I wasn't scared, I wasn't stupid either. I had to think ahead. I had to cover myself. So I went to the building manager again. This time, I asked politely if I could switch parking spaces. I told him the new space didn't matter. I just needed a change. He agreed, probably happy to get rid of the quiet foreigner who kept showing up with complaints no one wanted to deal with. But I didn't mind. I got a new space, and I knew I could return in a month or two to get another. It didn't matter. What mattered was that no one could prove anything. Spot 105 wasn't mine anymore. If anyone asked, I didn't care what happened in that space. It wasn't my responsibility. Now that the practical side was handled, it was time to enjoy the psychological side of this victory. That night, I wrote a new note, small, discreet, taped gently to the bicycle seat. It said, "I will unlock this bicycle in exchange for $100. Tape the bill under the seat, not a threat. Not violence, just an offer, a choice. A consequence wrapped in an opportunity. Fair, even. Because he had cost me money, cost me mornings, cost me respect. $100 was practically a discount. I didn't know if he'd pay, but it didn't matter. Because if he didn't pay, I already had a plan. A petty, meticulous, carefully calculated plan. A plan that didn't involve stealing the bicycle. He had locked it too well for that. But there were other things a person could do. Take the seat. Slash the tires. Remove the brakes. Scatter the small parts somewhere far away. Nothing illegal. Nothing that would get me arrested. Just the kind of inconvenience that would make him think twice before disrespecting someone ever again. As the days passed, I found myself thinking more deeply about the situation, not just the revenge, but everything around it. The psychology of disrespect, the way people treat each other, how some individuals walk through life assuming everyone else is a background character. That's what the red bicycle thief had done. He saw me as someone who didn't matter. Someone whose space he could take without consequence. Someone who would silently move aside when pushed. But people forget that silent doesn't mean weak. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. And polite doesn't mean submissive. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should be most careful with. Because we don't explode instantly. We simmer. We absorb. We plan. The next few days were strange. Almost peaceful. I went about my routines, work, groceries, occasional evening walks, and every time I passed the parking lot, I felt that subtle hum of satisfaction. The red bicycle, once a symbol of disrespect, had become a monument to justice. And the fact that its owner was probably losing his mind made it even better. One evening, as I walked back from the store, I saw someone standing near the bicycle area. A young man, maybe mid-20s, wearing a black jacket, white sneakers, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He stood frozen in front of the locked bike, staring at it like it had personally betrayed him. His posture screamed frustration, one hand rubbing the back of his neck, the other holding a crumpled note. Probably mine. I didn't approach him. I watched from a distance, hidden behind the vending machine near the entrance. His shoulders slumped. He sighed so deeply that even from far away I could see the exhaustion. He pulled at the lock half-heartedly, already knowing it wouldn't budge. Then he stood up, looked around anxiously, and walked away slowly, almost defeated. That was the moment I realized revenge isn't just about anger. It's about equilibrium, correction, the universe balancing itself gently. But the funny thing? I still didn't feel the need to unlock the bike. Not yet. The emotional payoff wasn't complete. The next morning, I checked the bicycle. No money taped under the seat. No note. Just the same lock, the same metal stand, the same quiet victory. And that's when the realization hit me. He wasn't just inconvenienced. He was learning, growing, being humbled. And there was something beautifully ironic about a lesson taught through a parking space and a steel lock. But my favorite moment, the moment that truly sealed everything, was still to come. And it was just around the corner. The strange thing about revenge is how quietly it settles into your life. At first, it feels loud, an explosion, a surge, a fire burning in your veins. But once it begins, once the plan sets into motion and starts delivering its slow consequences, everything becomes calm, measured, controlled. By the time the red bicycle had been locked in place for over a week, I had reached a state of almost meditative peace. Every morning I'd walk past it with a neutral face, but inside there was a warm glow, a soft satisfaction that hummed like a quiet engine. Yet beneath that calm was something else, a curiosity, because I knew humiliation can break people in different ways. Some get angry, some get desperate, some become clever, and I wanted to know which type the bicycle thief was. Over the past days, the notes taped to the parking stand had changed tones like shifting weather rage, confusion, fear, apology. But what came next? I didn't know. And that uncertainty made the next phase almost poetic. 3 days after the long apology note appeared, the building seemed quieter than usual. I didn't see the visitor at all. No footsteps echoing in the hallway. No distant voices entering the apartment above mine. It was as if the bicycle thief had either given up or planned something in the background. That thought didn't scare me, it intrigued me, because every move he made now was proof that he was reacting to me, not the other way around. That night, around 10 p.m., I stepped outside to throw away some trash. The air was cool, with a faint breeze brushing against my face. And when I passed the bicycle lot, I heard something, a faint metal sound. Not movement, not rattling, but scraping. Slow, frustrated scraping. I paused in the shadows beside the vending machine and leaned slightly forward. There, hunched near the bicycle stand, was the same young man I had seen earlier, the would-be owner of the red bicycle. Except now he wasn't just frustrated, he looked exhausted. His hair was messy as if he had been pulling at it. His jacket was half-zipped, his breathing heavy. In his hand, he held a toolsome, cheap metal cutter, probably bought in desperation at a hardware store. He pressed it against the lock and tried to squeeze with all his strength. His arms trembled. His jaw clenched. The cutter didn't even scratch the surface. After a few seconds, he let out a sound half-growl, half-groan, and dropped the tool, letting it clatter loudly against the concrete. Then he rested his forehead on the bicycle seat, shoulders slumped like a defeated child. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him, almost, because karma doesn't feel pity for those who created their own downfall. And this man, this entitled guest, was tasting a small fraction of the disrespect he had shown me. But what struck me most wasn't his frustration. It was the look in his eyes when he finally turned around. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even scared. He was simply tired. He stood up slowly, pocketed the useless cutter, and walked away, shoulders heavy, steps slow, face blank. For the first time, he looked like a real person, not the anonymous antagonist who had stolen my spot for weeks. But even then, even seeing him broken like that, I didn't feel guilt, because guilt belongs to those who act unfairly. What I felt was balance, emotional justice. and a part of me wondered just how much the experience was reshaping him. The next morning, I checked under the seat again. No money, no note, just silence. And that silence told me everything. It meant his pride was still fighting with his desperation. He wanted the bike back, but he didn't want to pay. He wanted a solution, but he didn't want to surrender. Pride is funny that way. It can make you climb mountains, but it can also drown you in shallow water. Over the next 2 days, I expected him to try again, maybe with a bigger tool, maybe with a friend, maybe with anger. But nothing happened. The red bicycle remained untouched, unmoved, frozen in that metal stand like a monument to stubbornness. Then the 9th day arrived, the turning point. It started early in the morning. I stepped outside at around 7:30, planning to get coffee from the convenience store. As I approached the parking area, I noticed something different. There was someone standing next to the red bicycle, not the young owner this time, but an older man. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. He wore a neat business suit, the type office workers in Japan wear. His expression was stern, almost disappointed. He inspected the locked bicycle closely, circling it, frowning deeply at the thick chain. I slowed down, watching silently from a slight distance. The older man crouched, examined the lock, tugged it, then sighed heavily. He straightened up and took out his phone. I heard him speak quietly but clearly in Japanese. "It's not opening." "No, I tried. It looks like a professional lock. Not something you can break easily." A pause. "No, we shouldn't call the police." "Not yet. It'll look bad." That sentence told me everything. This wasn't just a guest. This was someone connected. Maybe a father, maybe a relative, maybe an employer. The tone suggested responsibility, like he had been dragged into the situation unwillingly. He hung up and waited. A few minutes later, the young man appeared, eyes tired, face pale, posture stiff with anxiety. The moment he approached, the older man turned to him sharply and began speaking in low but firm Japanese. "What were you thinking? Why didn't you follow the rules? Why did you use someone else's spot?" His voice wasn't angry loud, it was angry quiet, the kind that cuts deeper. The young man didn't lift his head. He murmured excuses, soft, pitiful ones. Something about only for a short time, and didn't think it mattered, and just visiting. The older man didn't buy any of it. "You created this problem," he said bluntly. "You embarrassed yourself. And now you're embarrassing me." Then came the sentence that hit me harder than I expected. "People like you are the reason visitors get a bad reputation. People like you." It was interesting because that was exactly how he had treated me. Someone he assumed didn't matter. Someone he assumed had no right to space. Someone he believed would quietly tolerate disrespect. And seeing him on the receiving end of that kind of judgment, it felt like watching karma take human form. The older man looked around carefully, then leaned closer to the young man and said, "Solve this, now. I don't care how." "Fix it." The young man nodded, defeated. The older man left a moment later, the disappointment still etched across his features. When the young man was alone again, he stared at the lock with a strange expression, half misery, half contemplation. He crouched, touched the metal again, whispered something to himself. Then he sat down on the small concrete step next to the stand, elbows on knees, head buried in his hands. He stayed there for a long time. I know, because I lingered at the vending machine, pretending to choose a drink while watching him through the reflection in the glass. He didn't move. He didn't try anything. He just sat there, probably wrestling with guilt, embarrassment, and the reality that he had trapped himself by thinking someone else's space was his playground. Eventually, he stood up, took out a small piece of paper, and started writing, slowly, carefully. It took him several minutes. When he finished, he folded the paper neatly and taped it to the bicycle stand. Then, with trembling fingers, he lifted the seat slightly and taped something underneath. My heart skipped a beat, not in excitement, but in realization. Was it the money? When he finally walked away, shoulders slumped, but pace steady, I waited. I didn't go immediately. I wanted to give him time to leave the building. I didn't want him to suspect anything. 20 minutes later, I walked downstairs casually, as if I had just decided to check my old parking area for nostalgia. There, taped under the seat, was a crisp envelope. And inside was exactly 10,000 yen, a little under 100 United States dollars, clean bills. No hesitation, no bargaining. But it was the note taped to the stand that struck me the deepest. It said, in simple Japanese, "I am sorry. I was wrong. I disrespected your space and your time. I understand why you are angry. Thank you for teaching me a lesson. Please accept this. No insults. No excuses. Just acknowledgement, humility, growth." I stood there for a moment, absorbing it, because revenge wasn't supposed to feel like redemption for him or for me. Yet here we were. I had started this with anger boiling in my chest, humiliation stinging like salt on a wound. But now, reading that note, I felt something different, something ending, something resolving. I took the money, folded the note, and kept them both. Then, slowly, I unlocked the bicycle. The lock clicked open with the same metallic finality it had made when I first closed it. Except this time, the sound wasn't the sound of control, it was the sound of closure. I placed the lock back in my bag, gave the bike one last glance, and walked away. No dramatic gesture, no last-minute punishment, just a quiet exit. But the story wasn't finished yet. Later that evening, I returned home from work and saw something unexpected. The red bicycle was gone finally. But spot 105 wasn't empty. Instead, there was a small token placed on the metal stand. A gesture. A peace offering. A can of high-quality iced coffee, an expensive one. The type office workers drink when they need a treat. And next to it, a second note. Thank you. I won't forget this. I didn't touch the coffee. I didn't need to. The note alone was enough, because that was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about respect, restored, finally. And yet, even with this resolution, life had one last twist waiting for me. A twist that would shift the dynamic one final time and bring surprising new layer to the story I thought was already complete. When I walked out of the hospital that day, it felt as if the ground beneath me had dissolved. The air outside was cool, almost sharp, but not as sharp as the realization sinking deep into my chest. I paused near the parking lot, staring at the asphalt, trying to make sense of everything, though nothing made sense anymore. Every memory of her, the smiles, the laughter, the late-night talks, suddenly felt like carefully constructed lies. For months, maybe even years, I had been living a life built on half-truths, pretending I didn't notice inconsistencies, pretending I trusted her completely. And now that illusion was gone. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was systematic, calculated, and profoundly humiliating. Every small excuse she had ever given me, every tear she had pretended to shed, every sigh about stress or exhaustion, it all fell into place like a dam breaking. I could see the entire pattern now. The hidden meetings, the fabricated stories, the careful manipulation, everything. And it made me feel hollow and furious. At the same time, a strange mixture of pain, disbelief, and awakening. I slid into my car and sat there for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind was a chaotic storm. I replayed conversations over and over, trying to convince myself that maybe I had misunderstood, maybe there had been some kind of explanation. But the truth hit me with brutal clarity. She had been living an entirely different life behind my back while I had been giving her my trust, my care, and my heart. That slow, creeping realization of betrayal was worse than any sudden anger. It was a poison that sank into every nerve ending. My stomach churned, my head throbbed, and yet, beneath the swirl of emotions, something else started to emerge in odd, quiet clarity. It was the kind of clarity that comes when you stop struggling against the storm and instead watch it pass over you. My rage was still there, simmering, but it was no longer uncontrolled. I could feel it shaping itself into something deliberate, something strategic. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to break down. This wasn't about momentary satisfaction. It was about control, about reclaiming the narrative she had tried to hijack. When I finally reached home, she was there, casually scrolling on her phone, completely unaware that the fortress of lies she had built around herself was crumbling. She looked up when I entered, that same practiced softness on her face, the carefully calibrated innocent expression, designed to make me feel like everything was fine. "Where have you been? You were gone so long," she asked lightly, but the tone was loaded with expectation. She wanted a response, some explanation, some hint of concern or worry, something she could use later. But this time, I didn't give it. I simply looked at her, my face calm, almost empty, letting silence do the work that words once failed to achieve. She shifted slightly, unease flickering across her features. I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to decode my calm, trying to figure out if she had pushed me too far. For the first time, I had the upper hand not through confrontation, but through measured restraint. Silence had become my weapon, and she didn't know how to defend herself against it. That night, while she slept beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind, I stayed awake. I couldn't sleep, and I didn't want to. I walked quietly to the living room, opened my laptop, and began gathering evidence, everything I could find that proved what had been happening. Screenshots of messages, call logs, transaction receipts, dates and times carefully cross-referenced. Every small lie she had told, every inconsistency she had planted, every story she had fabricated was being collected. I didn't do this to punish her with public exposure. I didn't do it for anyone else's validation. I did it to reclaim my power, to ensure that if I walked away, I walked away armed with the undeniable truth. This was no longer about emotional pain. This was about strategy, control, and preparation. Every file I saved, every screenshot I labeled, every date I documented was a brick in the fortress I was quietly building around my freedom. Over the next several days, I performed a delicate balancing act. I acted normal, smiled, spoke lightly, went through routines as if everything was untouched, as if I hadn't uncovered her secret life. I played the part she expected me to play, calm, compliant, unaware. She continued her subtle manipulations, unaware that the tables had turned. Every small lie she tried to sneak in, every glance she cast to see if I noticed, every carefully placed word intended to test me, I observed, catalogued, and stored it away in my mind along with the evidence on my laptop. She was used to being in control. She was used to me reacting emotionally, to giving her the fuel she needed to manipulate outcomes. Now, she was performing in front of an audience of one me, and the audience was silent, steady, and unyielding. The power shift was intoxicating, and I felt a strange serenity I hadn't known for years. Anger had transformed into precision, into quiet but absolute control. One evening, after pretending to go out for a walk, I returned to the house quietly and watched her from a distance. She was on her phone, messaging someone I now knew she shouldn't have been, unaware that every word she typed could be traced, documented, and stored. I realized something profound in that moment. People like her thrive in ambiguity and chaos. They manipulate emotions, they play on trust, and they assume that silence equals weakness. But silence can be the sharpest edge of all, and preparation the deadliest weapon. By not reacting, by remaining calm, by observing, I was creating consequences more powerful than any immediate confrontation could ever produce. Her anxiety, her uncertainty, her attempts to test me, all of it was now feeding into a system she couldn't even perceive. I had become the quiet storm she had underestimated, and the satisfaction in that realization was almost unbearable in its intensity. As days turned into a week, I escalated my preparations. I consulted a lawyer discreetly, not because I wanted litigation immediately, but because I wanted to understand every legal avenue to protect myself and ensure that if confrontation ever became necessary, I would have the upper hand. Every message, every screenshot, every date of her deception was cataloged and time-stamped. I set reminders, created folders, and cross-referenced inconsistencies in her stories. The process was almost ritualistic, meditative in a way I hadn't expected. Each piece of evidence I secured was like reclaiming a piece of my own life that she had tried to steal, and every hour spent in careful preparation fortified me further. My emotions, once wild and chaotic, had been transformed into calm, methodical strategy. Then came the moment when the first cracks began to appear, not in me, but in her. I could see it in small ways. Her glances became more anxious, her messages to me slightly over-careful, as if she sensed a shift in the balance she couldn't explain. She tried to provoke reactions, as she always did, but the calmness I maintained made her unsure, hesitant, even fearful. The silence that once made her comfortable now unsettled her. I didn't speak about the evidence. I didn't hint at what I knew. I didn't accuse. I just existed in my quiet strength, and the effect was visceral. By the time that day arrived, I was ready not just mentally, but emotionally, psychologically, and strategically. The years of manipulation, of doubt, of betrayal had culminated in a moment of perfect clarity. I walked into the room where she waited, sensing nothing unusual, and for the first time, I held the power in my hands. Every lie she had told, every secret she had buried, every moment she had tried to control me, was now neutralized by preparation, patience, and calm resolve. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. I didn't even need to argue. I simply presented the facts, the irrefutable proof, and let silence do the rest. And in that silence, she finally understood not just that she had been caught, but that she no longer held any sway over me. That night, as I walked away from the house for the last time, the weight I had carried for months lifted off my shoulders. Every pang of anger, every ounce of humiliation, every sleepless night had transformed into a quiet, serene victory. I didn't feel triumph in the petty sense. I didn't feel satisfaction at her discomfort. I felt freedom. I felt power. I felt myself, finally, whole again. And that, I realized, was the ultimate revenge, not humiliation, not confrontation, not pain inflicted, but reclaiming yourself, taking control of your narrative, and walking away with dignity intact, leaving the one who betrayed you to confront the truth they tried so desperately to hide. The days following my final confrontation felt almost surreal. I woke up to a strange sense of calm, a peace I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of betrayal that had pressed down on my chest for so long was finally lifted. But even with that relief, my mind couldn't stop tracing back every moment, every lie, every tiny manipulation that had led me here. I realized revenge isn't just an action, it's a process. It's a transformation, a reclamation of control, a restoration of balance. It's not only about the other person feeling consequences. It's about reclaiming yourself, rebuilding your identity piece by piece. I had done that, and yet the story wasn't over. Life has a way of testing your patience even when justice has been served. I went about my normal routine as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Walking down the streets of my neighborhood, I noticed details I hadn't seen before, the way the sunlight hit the buildings, the way people moved around me, the subtle sounds of life I had ignored in my pain. My senses were sharper. My mind was clearer. I began noticing patterns in the small things, subtle gestures, quiet conversations, little moments of dishonesty in others, and I realized that my experience had made me hyper-aware. I was still cautious, but no longer vulnerable. I could observe without being manipulated. I could listen without being deceived, and I could act without letting emotions overpower me. This awareness became my armor. But there was still the red bicycle of my story in the back of my mind. While it belonged to a completely different scenario, the memory of locking it, watching the owner struggle, seeing the desperation and eventual apology, had taught me the power of strategic patience. Revenge isn't about immediate gratification. It's about creating a situation where the consequences naturally enforce themselves. Watching the bicycle owner's transformation from arrogance to desperation, then finally to humility, was one of the most powerful lessons in human psychology I'd ever witnessed. I realized that what made it so satisfying wasn't the act of locking the bike or demanding compensation. It was watching, justice unfold in a way the other person could understand and internalize. That clarity, that psychological correction, is what made the victory feel real and complete. In my personal life, the aftermath of my confrontation with her unfolded more slowly, but with a similar pattern. After I presented the evidence calmly, logically, without emotion, I stepped back and let reality take its course. She could no longer twist events or manipulate perception. Everything was documented. Everything was irrefutable. And I could see, over the next several days, how she adjusted her behavior. At first, she tried denial, but the evidence was too concrete. Then came excuses, weak attempts to downplay what had happened. Finally, there was silence. She realized she had lost control completely, and that silence was louder than any confrontation, any argument, any shouted accusation. It was the sound of accountability settling in for the first time. During this period, I also reflected deeply on my own behavior. I realized how much I had tolerated, how much I had internalized, and how long I had allowed myself to feel powerless. The experience forced me to understand boundaries in a way I hadn't before. I learned that silence and patience are forms of power, that observation is a tool, and that emotional intelligence, especially self-control, is the sharpest weapon one can wield in a world full of deceit and manipulation. The sense of empowerment I felt wasn't born out of anger, but out of strategic action, careful planning, and moral clarity. That understanding became a new foundation for my life, stronger than any lesson learned in anger could have been. One evening, as I walked past the old bicycle parking lot for nostalgia's sake, I noticed a subtle change. Spot 105, which had once been a battlefield of respect and power, was now empty. It was clean, orderly, mundane. No bike, no notes, no struggle. Just an empty space waiting for someone new. And in that emptiness, I found a reflection of myself. The place that had once symbolized conflict and frustration now symbolized resolution. The struggle had ended. The lesson had been learned. And the universe, in its own quiet way, had restored balance. I felt a wave of satisfaction unlike anything I had expected, not revenge for revenge's sake, but justice, fairness, and emotional equilibrium. That quiet victory, more than anything else, was worth every sleepless night, every plan meticulously executed, every ounce of patience I had mustered. As the weeks went on, I found myself applying these lessons in broader aspects of life. I approached relationships with greater discernment, work with sharper focus, and conflicts with cooler heads. I realized that revenge, when guided by intelligence and patience, can be transformative. It doesn't have to destroy. It can correct. It doesn't have to hurt others unnecessarily. It can teach. And most importantly, it doesn't have to consume you. By focusing on strategy, observation, and moral clarity, I had turned what could have been a bitter, consuming experience into an opportunity for growth. I had regained myself entirely, and that empowerment carried into every decision, every interaction, every corner of my life. Reflecting on the entire journey, the bicycle incident, the betrayal, the confrontation, I understood that the emotional highs and lows weren't accidental. They were lessons. The anger taught me boundaries. The frustration taught me patience. The betrayal taught me vigilance. And the eventual calm, the calculated actions, and the final victory taught me mastery over my own emotions. Mastery over oneself is, I realized, the most satisfying form of revenge. Because no one can take it away, no one can diminish it, and no one can manipulate it. It exists solely within you, unshakable and permanent. There were moments, of course, when I caught myself smiling at the memory of the locked red bicycle, or recalling the expression on her face when I presented the evidence, calmly and systematically. Those moments were bittersweet, not because of malice, but because they reminded me of how far I had come, how powerless I had felt, and how much power I had reclaimed. How a seemingly small act of bicycle lock, a note, a calculated pause could ripple into profound psychological lessons and create transformations that neither the thief nor the liar anticipated. Those reflections were not indulgence. They were validation. They were proof that intelligence, patience, and strategy can achieve far more than impulsive anger ever could. Finally, one quiet evening, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the buildings with a warm golden glow. I sipped tea slowly, letting the warmth fill me. In the distance, I could see bicycles parked neatly in their spaces, people walking home from work, children laughing. Life continued, relentless, indifferent, beautiful. And in that ordinary moment, I understood something crucial. Revenge is temporary, but self-mastery, justice, and clarity are permanent. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about punishing others, it was about reclaiming my life, reclaiming my time, and reclaiming my dignity. And in that reclamation, I found something far more valuable than anger or triumph: freedom. The story had come full circle. From frustration to planning, from observation to action, from confrontation to resolution, I had navigated the turbulent waters of betrayal and emerged not broken, not bitter, but stronger, wiser, and unshakably in control. And as I watched the city lights flicker to life, I smiled softly, knowing that the lessons I had learned, the strength I had built, and the clarity I had gained would guide me forever. The red bicycle, the lies, the betrayal, they were all part of a narrative that had transformed me from a passive participant in my own life into its master. And that, ultimately, was the sweetest, most lasting victory of all.